Hi there, Booktube. It's me, Sadie. I am back. It is the August wrap-up here around in Sadieville. I had an endodontist appointment this morning, so I'm a little sore. Still experiencing technical difficulties. I also have a very old, very cranky Frankie. This is my 19-year-old Frank. And she has rather bad arthritis, and she's losing her teeth, and she's on fluids. She's basically doing her thing, and I am just making sure she's happy and comfy, and if she wants to be in my lap, then she's going to be in my lap. But I have read a few books, and I did want to run through them. I didn't think it was that productive, but it looks productive looking back on it. Because I was focusing a lot on getting through more of the War and Peace, and I also read quite a large non-fiction book, which we'll get to. So I'm going to do them in the order I finished them this month and go from there. The first book, and there's cat fur flying everywhere because that's my life right now. The first book I read was Dead Letters by Kate Dolan Leach, and it is a book of the month. It was the first book of the month I ever did. It was, I believe, Becky Ford who gave this 5 out of 5, which made me excited to try it, and it was a good read. It was a quick read, but it was not a memorable read. We have the basic premise that there's a pair of twins. One has apparently killed herself after the first twin is estranged for several years. She goes off to do, I want to say, a master's or a PhD in France in comparative literature, and her twin is left alone on the family vineyard. And subsequently, one kills herself or is killed. That's part of the mystery. There's a big mystery going on. All of a sudden, the other twin starts getting text messages and emails from the dead twin, and everything is a schmozzle. It was a good, quick read. It gripped me that way. It wasn't something I'll ever read again, and it's not something I would be like, you need to read this book. Read this book now. I could see where certain genres it would be a 5 out of 5. For me, it was a 3 out of 5 because I found it to be a good, solid read. What I found annoying was, and maybe it's only me, but everything related to wine. I understand is taking place on a vineyard, but if you have absolutely no winery experience and you don't drink wine and you aren't a wine connoisseur, all the wine references are kind of pointless. And it seems to me that, okay, now as an ex-smoker, I don't care if you smoke. Really, go ahead, be my guest, I don't mind. I'm here for you, I support your right to do it, but there was a cigarette lit on every page of this book, and it gets a little annoying because it's like, can she do anything aside from get drunk and smoke? Because 90% of this book is getting drunk and smoking. But if you read it quickly, like you would a summer read that you're sitting on a beach, etc., etc. I believe I read it during a heat wave where I was kind of out of it because I had pain pills for a burn I got. And there you go, Frank. Go ahead. So it's a good, quick read. If you like mysteries, it's kind of twisty. There she goes. As you can see, she has trouble walking. Heartbreaking. Okay. But she's on pain meds and she's good. So, if you like murder mysteries, I would assume I have Into the Water. Is that the new one from the girl on the train, Paul Hawkins? I assume it reads like one of those, in that you'll enjoy it for the couple of days you're reading it, but at the end, it's not going to be something where you're like, the writing was magnificent and the plot was so beautifully done. So, that was my thought. It was a good read. Is it staying in my house and on my shelves? No. No, it's not. I have to figure out where to put my pile now, because I've got 3 piles going on. I've got the haul. I've got the Goodwill haul, so double haul. I've got my pile of red. Anyway, you can see some of the piles going on here. After that, I read Autumn by Ali Smith, and this was a revelation, and it was probably at the perfect time because I had come off the heels of reading the book of the month, and it was not as impressive as I thought it was going to be. I had high expectations. So I went into this thinking Ali Smith has been touted as very stream of consciousness at times. And this has been also called the first Brexit novel. Now, I may have missed something, but I didn't feel that it was inherently Brexit. Maybe it's because I'm from Canada and I can remember the referendums for Quebec trying to separate, but it just felt very, or the fact that I live in America and they're trying to get rid of immigrants here. It's very poignant for a divisive world and how that happens. And, you know, after I finished it, and I finished it in a day and a half. I think it's 200 and some odd pages, but it's also got really big font. So, a day and a half, and I loved it. And one of the funny things about it was, after I read it, I sat there and I thought, what did I just read? Like, I know I read this story, and I know these characters, and I really liked the characters. And I really got engaged with Daniel. Is it Daniel Gluck? Yes, it's Daniel Gluck. Daniel Gluck, for some reason, was just beautiful to me. And so as we follow our narrator through the story of this artwork and of understanding Brexit and her mother going a little sideways, and she's learning things, and she's reminiscing about Daniel Gluck, who was a next door neighbor, who it was in a coma, maybe, I assume, maybe not all there, but in a care facility. So I have to read it again. I know I'm going to love it more. I know I'm going to get more out of it. But I finished reading it and I knew I loved it, but I couldn't really put my finger on why I loved it. So this is on the Man Booker list, and I really think it should be put on the short list and probably even win. I have a couple of the other Man Bookers. I've actually ordered a couple of them, the ones that are interesting me, on the long list that I want to read. I've never done, I'll put this down now. No, it goes in a different pile because that one's staying. That one's getting reread possibly more than 4 times. Like that, loved that book. I can't sing its praises enough. But I am going to try a Man Booker. I've never tried to do a prize before. I've never done the Canada Reads here in America. I've never been into any of the book prizes, but I'm going to try Man Bookering. Next up was a shocking depression. I read The Stone Mattress and 9 Wicked Tales by Margaret Atwood, who can do no wrong in my books, until I read this. I am a disciple of Margaret Atwood. Margaret Atwood touched my hand and called me a work of art once, and I cried. Margaret Atwood is the saint of Canada. Margaret Atwood is the be-all and end-all. I have read almost everything by her, minus a few things. This was one of them, and I saved it for when I was down because I knew it would bring me back up. And I will say, I Dream of Xenia with Bright Red Teeth. Oh my goodness. Because Robert Bride is my favorite. I know some people think it's trite, but Robert Bride is my favorite. The Handmaid's Tale, also amazing. Robert Bride, Cat's Eye, The Edible Woman. These are the Alias Grace, like all of those. And then I'll do the Mad Adams. I'm okay with the Mad Adam trilogy. I'm okay with it, but it's not like my pièce de résistance. So this one is going down as one of my least favorite Margaret Atwoods, and while I will keep it as a memory of what I don't like when she does it. The first 4? What is it? How many are in the Afinland one? 3. The first 3 stories are loosely linked to each other, and they are perfectly good short stories. In fact, I like how they kind of build off each other. That was really nice. But the Stone Mattress, the actual titled Stone Mattress, wasn't a big fan. The Dead Hand Loves You had kind of an H.P. Lovecraft vibe, but it felt like it was trying too hard. It's like, no, Margaret, stay in your lane. You're good at other things. You do not need to be good here. I've already said I Dream of Xenia is amazing. The Freeze-Dried Groom I could have skipped over quite happily. Lucis Naturae was okay. It didn't really do anything for me. So for of the 9, maybe 5, I'm okay with. 1 really good one. 3, I'd read them again, but everything else I can live without ever touching again. I'm sorry, Margaret. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I love your work, but not this. The cover is beautiful, though. I will keep it arbitrarily for my friends who like Margaret Atwood and short stories, because maybe they'll love it. Then, I'm actually looking, I have a list of how I've read these. And then, because I wasn't depressed enough, I picked up Trigger Warning by Neil Gaiman. I got this when it came out. I tried to start reading it when it came out. I got through maybe a story or 2, or one of, I know I got through the introduction. I think I got 3, maybe 4 story, poem thingies through it. If Margaret Atwood had depressed me, Neil Gaiman kicked me in the face. And not in a good way. This was atrocious. It was like a cash grab. I love American Gods. I haven't seen the TV show. I enjoyed Anansi Boys. I like Neverwhere. Totally dug Stardust. Like, I've read most of his adult works. I've read some of his juvenilia, Coraline. The book is way better than the movie. The movie got totally screwed up. The Cemetery book, M is for Magic. So I've read a fair bit. I wish I hadn't bought it in hardcover. I wish I hadn't bought it at all. It was a slog. I wouldn't let the book win. I wanted to DNF it, but I couldn't. It's short fiction and disturbances, and at times it was just too short. It wasn't fleshed out. It felt monotonous. I'm sorry, Neil. I wanted more. And this is why I'm not going to read Norse mythology, because I hear it's just a rehash of American Gods, and that I honestly think that since he got married to Amanda Palmer, whom I also love, that he's just, it's not there anymore. Sometimes you get married and you lose it. And I think maybe it's not come back yet. So there was that. And I was mad. Now, I kept reading short stories. You may say, Sadie, you hate short stories. Yes, I do. But I was trying to give them a run because I was reading War and Peace, and I wanted little things that I could, like, stick in between things, like waiting in the doctor's office, or waiting in a line, or before bed when I don't want to dig into Russian names, or I don't want to read nonfiction. And then I pulled out Scars, stories by W.P. Kinsella. And I'm about to lay down some knowledge on you. I will do a full review of this, so I'm not going to get into as much as I'd like to right now. But W.P. Kinsella, I believe, is an American. I don't know if they put this in here. I believe he's from Iowa. He is mostly famous for his Shoeless Joe Jackson story, which became the movie Field of Dreams. In Canada, he lived in Alberta, close to Edmonton, next to Hobbema, which is a reserve area. So he lived by a reserve. He was a white guy who lived by a reserve. He wrote a lot of stories about Aboriginal people living on the reserve. Scars is short stories about them. This is his first book. His most popular book of Aboriginal works is Dance Me Outside, which was turned into a movie, and subsequently a TV show called The Res, which I adored. And not just because there's a character named Sadie who is really kick-ass as a woman. So, if Joseph Boyden is problematic because he says he's an Indian, and then he's not as Indian as he says he is, and he's writing about Indians, and that's the problem, W.P. Kinsella is a white dude writing about Indians. So where do we come at him? A lot of people say we shouldn't enjoy W.P. Kinsella because he's a white man writing about Indians. But I have never read something that I felt so attached to as an Aboriginal person as his short fiction. Given I started reading him in high school, but he doesn't mock things, and he doesn't make it overly rife with meaning. He just has these beautiful characters who are flawed human beings who go about their daily life, and from the reserve and to the big city, and all of these various things happen, and no, their lives are not good, and bad things happen. But he writes it so well. I honestly believe that as long as you write it well and you acknowledge who you are and where you're from, and it may not coincide, you're fine. This means he's a good writer. He writes from the perspective of Silas Ermineskin, however you want to inflect that word. So the English is written in reserve dialect. He has a very reserved sound to it. His syntax is different. His choice of sentences is different. And while some people have found that degrading, I do it too. When I go home to the reserve, I get a different accent and I talk differently for days. My husband has pointed it out. I even laugh different. Because when you come from that, I'm not a reserve-born Indian. I'm a urban Indian who has a reserve that I go to. And so when I interact with people who are from the reserve, I tend to pick that up because that's normal. I have a lot of friends who sound like that and who talk like this. So I don't find it derogatory. Given this was published in the 70s or 80s? 1978. This is his first book, published in 78. I cannot stress enough that if you want to read Aboriginal fiction, even though it's by a white dude, I feel you will get a better understanding from it. He did live close to the reserve. He did know these people. I have no problem believing that he might have even been adopted into a reserve, which can happen. It does happen frequently. You may not gain status or whatever, but you're considered one of the community. He just writes it so well. Just so beautifully, and all these stories in here, there's no table of contents or I'd tell you which ones were my favorite, but honestly, I read it in a night. It's not very big. It's 154 pages. Read it in a night. It was magical. There wasn't a story I didn't like. So, yeah. I'll probably do a compare and contrast with W.P. Kinsella books, just because I have a bunch of them, and people seem to enjoy that in terms of the polygamy books. Then, I finished. I've been reading it for a couple months now. And you may say, why a couple months? Well, a couple months because it's very dense and very big. I started it as my nonfiction, and I wanted to finish it for September because I'm doing a read-along of The Cancer Ward by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. I'll learn how to say it before next time. With Biblio Atlas, and so I finished this. Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind by Yuval Noah Harari. And my greatest takeaway from reading this was that I have had a lot of university education in that field. And while it was great, and I enjoyed reading it, there were parts that I thought didn't need to be there. There was stuff that was way oversimplified. So if you know nothing, if you're approaching it as a nothing, like I know nothing, I took no sciences, I don't engage in theological debate, or I haven't, but I'm open to it, it's a great book for you. But if you've done anything advanced, it could be a little bit rough. I also found that he really went too much, I understand that religion plays a part, but I would have liked to see more science than the religiosity of stuff. His capitalism section was well done, but for me, as a primer, it would be good for someone. I've read too many specialized books on each of the different ideas that it just seemed to gloss over everything in a way I wasn't really a fan of. So yes, good book. Won't read it again, but I'd recommend it to anyone who wants to learn more about the history of humans, our evolution, capitalism, that evolution, religious evolution. Just if you want to get started on evolutions, not necessarily not evolution. Well, they do Homo sapiens and Homo sapiens sapien. We're not doing creationism versus versus evolution here. But if you want to see how the trajectory of humans as we've progressed through history in just a general way, it's a great book. If you have taken any advanced science classes, any advanced economics classes, theology classes, anthropology classes, or sociology classes, it may be a little too novice for you. Then I read The Interpreter of Maladies by Jhumpa Lahiri. As you can see, it says there on the silver sticker that you cannot read winner of the Pulitzer Prize. I threw it on the ground. Actually, I put it down and it fell on the ground, and I don't care about it enough to pick it up. They were well written, I will tell you that. But I didn't care about most of them. Again, in this one, I believe there were 9. Yes, there were 9. And I liked 2. 2 stories, and they were the first ones, The Temporary Matter and When Mr. Pirzada Came to Dine. Those were the 2 stories I really liked that will keep me going onward to Jhumpa Lahiri, and I'm wondering if she just fell into the abyss that was my dislike of short stories, and that is why I can no longer enjoy them. I enjoyed Scars. Maybe I set it up too high after that, but you'd think with the Margaret Atwood and the Neil Gaiman that I would have no. Did not enjoy well, no, I won't say that. I enjoyed it, but I didn't care about it. It'd be good for reading if you're on a trip and you just want to read, like on a plane, you want to get through a story or two between stopovers. For that, it would be great. I do have 2 novels by her. I have The Namesake and Lowland, and I want to read those because I believe with bigger scopes, she would be amazing. So that's my takeaway from that. It's well written. The stories are all about Indian people. Like, I mean, kind of a letdown. I'm not going to lie to you. The last book I finished this month, not the last book I started, I'm still reading that one, but the last book I finished this month, because it's the last day of the month, was a solid gold hit for me. It's Nick Hornsby's 31 Songs, which kind of reads like a short story collection, in that it has 31 of his favorite songs, and he writes about why they're his favorite and what he feels is important about them. Then he has the top 10. What is it? There's a couple of other chapters. There's the new top 10 list, and just little short things about Nick Cave, Steve Earle, Los Lobos, almost like little essays about specific bands for like 4. I pulled up each song and listened to it while I was reading this. Now, if you are not a music junkie, if you don't care about music, if reading about music does nothing for you, this book is useless. If you did not enjoy High Fidelity, this book is probably also useless. If you loved High Fidelity, if you loved About a Boy, probably really going to get into this. It's wonderful in terms of having a soundtrack to it. It's great to see the different music he highlights. I find some of his stuff interesting. Like, he goes from Ani DeFranco and Bruce Springsteen to Nelly Furtado and Teenage Fan Club. So some of it's I question where he came up with it. He insults Bob Dylan. I've seen Bob Dylan 3 times. I do not, my niece's middle name is Dylan. We're big into Bobs in my family. So maybe Steve Donahue would enjoy this because he does not like Bob Dylan. But, and the Beatles are in here. Such a breath of fresh air, and I love reading about music, and I love reading about songs and how they impact people, because I honestly believe that for some people that's how we express our emotions, and I am one of those people. I make mixed CDs, I made mixed tapes. That's just who I am as a person. So reading this just made me happy and magical, and I love Nick Hornby, and I'm glad I got to end on that note. So that's everything I read in the month of August. I hope you had a pretty wicked August too. I will probably upload my my hauls at a later time. Yeah,